Today we begin the fourth of the five books of Moses called Bamidbar. The first week of the Chumash Bamidbar is the Parsha Bamidbar. So we're in the fourth book, which is called Bamidbar, and this week's Torah portion is also Bamidbar. Bamidbar is the fourth book that talks about from when the Jewish people are at the foot of Mount Sinai. They received the Torah already, and now we are going towards the land of Israel. So from the foot of Mount Sinai until the threshold of Israel is what we discuss in this entire volume 4 of the 5 books. It's titled Numbers because the first thing that God does is takes the census of the Jewish people to see how many people we are. The census are done between the people, the men from ages 20 to 60. The reason for this is to make sure that we know how many men we have that are fit to fight for the war, while the women will look after the children, the men will be able to fight the war. And this is all only in the case that when we come to the land of Israel, we have to fight off the people who are occupying the land, so we know that we have an army ready to fight. There's a very interesting thing that we learn from today's Torah reading, which is why we call today the health and healing. Because census will not give us the proper number of how many men we have fit that are to serve the army. Naturally, everyone should have to go through an exercise, and then we can tell who is fit and who is unfit. But the Torah doesn't do that, it just takes a census. So we know how many people we are, but what if some people are sick, some people are crippled? How do we know how many people we have for war? So this is a very interesting lesson that we learn in today's learning. So we're in the book, The Daily Wisdom, on page 275. We're reading from the second reading, where the Torah records the total number of adult males in each tribe. Miraculously, all those counted were fit to go to war. They were all strong and able-bodied men. How do we know this? From the verse. The verse tells us, "V'yiyu b'nei Reuven koil yotzei tzava." The verse tells us that the tally of the tribe of Reuven, and these are all those who are fit to serve in the army. So you see what the verse tells us here? That's listing all those that are fit, which means that every male between the ages 20 and 60 were fit to go to war. All the sick and crippled Jews were healed when the Torah was given. So if the Torah was given 7 weeks after we left Egypt, from the moment the Torah was given, all of a sudden nobody was sick anymore. If somebody was crippled, someone had a weak leg, a weak arm, they couldn't see well, their vision was impaired or their hearing was impaired, all of a sudden, all of their problems went away. Thanks to the protective clouds of glory, the Jews remained healthy throughout their journey despite the adverse conditions of the desert. So we would expect that their health would deteriorate while they're journeying in the desert, but instead, it was quite the opposite. The clouds of glory that was surrounding the Jewish people from on top, hence we know this from the holiday of Sukkot. We have the tent with the schach as a roof. That's reminding us of the cloud that protected us. And the cloud was also on all 4 sides of the Jewish people. And the Medrash describes that this cloud would pave the road for the Jewish people. It would cool off the sand, that it shouldn't be hot. It would brush away any dangerous snakes that were there, any plants that were in the way, any valleys that filled up, any mountains that flattened. So the Jewish people were able to travel in a very peaceful way. So the clouds of glory also provided a health for the Jewish people, and it allowed no one to get sick. It also says that it dry cleaned everyone's clothing. And the clothing grew with the people as they grew. So we see from this that the Jewish people, by virtue of their connection to God, expressed through studying Torah and fulfilling its commandments, were not bound by the laws of nature. Furthermore, their ability to override nature was self-evident, expressed not only in spiritual concerns, but in the physical health and well-being as well. So as they studied Torah and performed the mitzvahs, their health got better. This holds true today as it did when the Torah was given on Mount Sinai, to the extent that we live our lives according to the dictates of the Torah. We too will be blessed with the spiritual and physical health despite our obstacles posed by the laws of nature. So nature poses these laws that tell us that if a person falls or gets sick, then they're sick. But the Torah says if you perform these mitzvahs, then we are better. How does all of this work? So for a little Kabbalah. Kabbalah tells us that we know when the Torah was given, it gave us 613 commandments, 356 negative commandments, 248 positive commandments. The Kabbalah tells us that these numbers represent 248 blood vessels and 356 organs that we have in our bodies. Our body is a comparison to, quote unquote, God's body. Of course, we know that God doesn't have a physical body, but God relates to us in the same ways that we relate to our own body. So it says that man was created in the image of God. What does it mean in the image of God? That these are the blood vessels and these organs and the way our body system conducts itself, so too that's the way God relates to the world. That's how God relates to human beings. So if we want to relate to God in a certain specific energy, there is a specific mitzvah that we could do, or a negative commandment that we don't do in order to heal this specific part of our body. What are these exact relationships with each bone in our body, with the relationship to the spiritual health that God gives us? We are not fully aware of all these details, but the Rebbe was aware of these details. And oftentimes when people came to the Rebbe asking for a bracha, asking for a blessing, the Rebbe would tell people, you should be careful with eating kosher, you should light Shabbos candles, you should give charity. The Rebbe gave different answers to people, and when they started doing that mitzvah, all of a sudden, they became healed. Why were they healed? It's not that the Rebbe was performing magic, but rather, the Rebbe understood that there was a blockage in this spiritual healing that was needed to enter into the person's body, and what was causing this blockage. So if you go to a medical professional, he might say that eating too much meat and it's clogging your what's it called? It's making a clog, and therefore it's making it difficult for the blood flow to go through your heart, and therefore you should go off red meat. But for the Rebbe, it was a different perspective. For the Rebbe understood that there was a spiritual clog, and if you unclog that spirituality, you're going to allow the spirituality to flow through. I would share a personal story. My father's father, his name was Shalom Shaya Deitch, my grandfather. We called him Zayda Shalom. He passed away while my father and my mother were engaged. So we're talking about 55 years ago, or 52, 53 years ago. And he went into the Rebbe for a private audience to ask the Rebbe for a blessing for himself to be healed. He was a Russian immigrant who served 3 years in the Red Army, and he was hurt during the army, and he was working with a lot of electrical stuff, and it caused damage to his health. And they think that that's what caused his health to deteriorate and his heart to fail. So he was sick for about 2.5 years with a very weak heart, and he goes into the Rebbe for a private audience asking the Rebbe for a bracha, for a blessing. One can imagine he's in his 40s. The first 40 years of his life were extremely difficult. They finally come to the shores of America after living in teepee camps and refugee camps, and they finally come here. They set up a business, they buy a home, and his oldest child is engaged to get married, and he's very sick. And he's very scared. What's going to be? I finally set up my entire family, and I don't know how long I'm going to survive. The doctors didn't have They weren't as advanced as they are today, and it didn't look very bright for him. So he described to the Rebbe that I feel like I'm sitting on a ticking bomb, and this bomb can explode in any minute, and I don't know what to do. So the Rebbe responded to him that you're not sitting on a ticking bomb, but you're sitting in God's hands. And what you need is you need to have emunah and bitachon. You have to have faith and trust in Hashem, that Hashem will bring you healing. Now, a few months after the story, he passed away, and there is many ways of understanding this private audience that took place, and there was a follow-up of this story, which continues about a year later. So my parents get married, and my grandmother was very heartbroken. She never really truly recovered from her heart being shattered this last time. And she's in the Rebbe's, she's having a private audience with the Rebbe, and she's complaining about different difficulties and challenges that she's having. And at one point, she composes herself and she tells the Rebbe that before my son and daughter-in-law got engaged, we asked you for a blessing for their engagement. And you gave a blessing for their engagement, which means that you're the matchmaker. And for a matchmaker, I need to pay you. I need to pay you your fee. So she asks the Rebbe, how much do I owe you? My husband passed away. He wasn't able to pay you. So what can I pay you? The Rebbe got very, very serious, and the Rebbe told her that I'm going to ask from you for emunah and bitachon, to have faith and trust in Hashem, that everything that happens from God is because God wanted it to be, and this is the way it should be. And this was the second time that the Rebbe told our family that this is what's expected from you. And throughout the next 30 years, this story repeats itself in different occasions where the family requests something from the Rebbe. The Rebbe keeps telling the family that this is what's expected from you. So for us, we hold this very dear, that first of all, the Rebbe truly feels that we're capable of being held that's at this standard, that we're able to be accountable, to have a true faith and trust in Hashem. But also it's a blessing that the Rebbe is giving you a blessing that yes, it's a difficult task, but you can do it. And I think this story represents what we're reading in this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion tells us that every person was healed. How were they healed? Because they were studying Torah and mitzvahs. They had true faith that they were going to enter the land of Israel. They had faith that if there's a war, they're going to fight and they're going to be victorious. So it was their trust and faith that they had in Hashem that gave them this health, that gave them this power, this victorious power, that nothing can stand in their way, nothing could hold them back, nothing could clog their arteries, because their superpower is going to charge anything that stands in their way. So when the verse tells us that everyone was healed, it's not something in the past. It's not something that when the Jews were in the desert, they had these clouds of glory protecting them, and they lived in this miracle realm. They were eating this manna bread, and their life was so simple. But for us, living here today, we can't expect something like that. But I share these personal stories with you to understand that you and I could obtain this level of health and well-being even today. Even though we don't have the clouds of glory protecting us, but we have the Torah. We have emunah, we have faith in Hashem, we have bitachon, and we have trust in Hashem, and we have to use this out to really see that we can bring this down into our day-to-day life, in our difficult challenges that we have, and this will enable us to overcome all of these challenges. Have a wonderful day.